She looked at me like I was furniture. Not with contempt. Contempt would have required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would have required her to register me as a person worth having feelings about. She looked at me the way you look at a chair when you are deciding whether to sit in it, with the brief, functional assessment of someone cataloging the utility of an object. Then she looked away, back to her phone, back to whatever was more important than the woman standing in front of her with a notepad and a water pitcher and 11 years of Japanese language study that she did not yet know about. I had been a waitress at Oleander for 4 years. Oleander was the kind of restaurant that existed in the specific stratum of American dining, where the tablecloths were actual linen, and the wine list was its own separate document, and the customers came not just for the food, but for the specific experience of being in a room that confirmed their sense of themselves as people who belonged in rooms like this. I had learned the room. I had learned its rhythms and its requirements and the particular language of service that the room demanded, the precise distance between attentive and intrusive, the specific calibration of presence that made the customer feel seen without feeling watched. I had learned all of it, and I was good at it. Danielle Ockhafer, 5'7", natural hair pinned back for service, uniform pressed the way my grandmother taught me to press things, with intention, not just heat, good at her job, invisible in the way that service workers are invisible when they are doing their job correctly. Table 14 had been sat at 7:15. A party of 6, according to the reservation. 5 Americans in the specific uniform of finance and technology. Good suits, the particular haircuts of men who pay for haircuts without thinking about the cost, the specific vocal confidence of people who have been listened to so consistently that they have forgotten listening is a choice someone makes. And one woman, the woman at the head of the table. She was Japanese. Small, not fragile, small in the way of someone who has learned that the space you occupy is not determined by its physical dimensions. She wore a suit that cost more than my monthly rent without announcing that it did. Her hair was precise. Her posture was the posture of someone who has been told their whole life that how you hold your body in a room tells the room what to do with you, and who has internalized that instruction completely. She was also, I would find out later, Tanaka Yuki, the founder and CEO of Tanaka Global Innovations, a Tokyo-based technology conglomerate with a market capitalization that required a number with 12 zeros after it. She was the 43rd wealthiest person in Asia. She had been named, 4 consecutive years, to the Forbes list of the most powerful women in the world. I did not know any of this when I approached table 14 with my notepad and my water pitcher and my practiced professional smile at 7:17 on a Tuesday evening. What I knew was, the 5 American men were doing all the talking. They were talking at each other and around each other with the specific overlapping energy of people whose relationships are built primarily on the performance of confidence for each other. They were talking about the deal. Whatever the deal was, I did not catch the specifics, but the deal was large and the deal was important, and the deal was clearly the reason they were all at Oleander on a Tuesday evening. The woman at the head of the table was not talking. She was listening with the specific quality of someone who is collecting information rather than participating in an exchange. Her expression was composed and neutral and entirely unreadable, which I noted because unreadable is not the same as absent. She was very present. She was simply not showing you what she was doing with her presence. When I reached the table, Gary, the man who appeared to be the primary American on the American side of whatever negotiation this dinner represented, said, without looking at me, "We'll do the tasting menu, everybody, and bring the wine list." He said this to the table, not to me. And to the table, to the air, to the general space where service people are assumed to exist when they are needed and not exist when they aren't. "Of course," I said. "And for the lady, she'll have the same," Gary said. I looked at the woman. The woman had not been consulted. The woman was sitting at the head of the table, a position that, in the geometry of table arrangements, communicates primacy, and the man across from her had just ordered for her without turning to her or pausing or doing anything that acknowledged her as a separate person with separate preferences. She looked at me for the first time. Briefly, the furniture assessment, then back to her phone. I brought the wine list. Gary ordered the wine, a significant Burgundy, chosen with the specific showmanship of a man who wants the table to know he knows wine without being obvious about wanting them to know. I poured. I served. The tasting menu began. If you are here from the beginning, stay. Subscribe to this channel right now before we go one word further. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. Because what is about to happen at Table 14 of Oleander Restaurant is the kind of thing that happens when the world's assumptions about who deserves what kind of treatment collide with a reality that the world was not prepared for. And the woman who is going to be at the center of what happens is not the woman you think. Now, back to Danielle. Back to the beginning of a night that changed 2 lives. I need to tell you about the Japanese before I tell you the rest. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, the second of 3 children of Dr. James Ockhafer and Patricia Ockhafer née Williams, who were respectively a cardiologist and a high school English teacher, and who had in common the specific parenting philosophy of people who believe that the best thing you can give a child is not comfort, but capability. My father had done a medical fellowship in Tokyo in his late 20s, before I was born, and had come back to Baltimore with a permanent love for Japan. Its food, its culture, its specific aesthetic of function and beauty existing in the same object without contradiction. And a Japanese that he kept practiced and alive through books and films, and the Japanese community in Baltimore, and a subscription to a Japanese newspaper that came by mail and sat on the kitchen table every Sunday morning alongside the American one. He taught me to read hiragana when I was 5. Not because he had a plan for me, not because he envisioned me sitting in a restaurant 14 years later with a notepad and a water pitcher, and the specific convergence of training and circumstance that was coming. He taught me because he loved it, and he was the kind of father who shared what he loved. By the time I was 8, I was having simple conversations with him in Japanese at the dinner table, which my mother tolerated with the specific patient amusement of a woman who had not signed up for bilingual meal times, but had decided it was not worth the energy to object. By 12, I was reading Japanese novels, slowly, with a dictionary beside me, but reading. By 15, I was watching Japanese television without subtitles and understanding most of it. By the time I went to Howard University, I had 16 years of Japanese behind me, and I enrolled in the East Asian Studies program, not because I needed to. My Japanese was already at a level that the introductory courses could not touch, but because I wanted the formal structure, the grammatical precision, the literary history. I graduated with a degree in East Asian Studies and a minor in linguistics. I spoke Japanese at what my professors assessed as near-native fluency, with a Tokyo accent that one Japanese visiting professor had described, in the specific surprised tone of someone whose assumption has just been overturned, as indistinguishable. I was also a waitress. Because East Asian Studies degrees from Howard are genuinely excellent at producing people who speak Japanese and genuinely limited at producing immediately available pathways into careers that use that Japanese. And because I was 26 and figuring it out, and Oleander paid well, and the work was honest. These two facts, the Japanese and the waitressing, had coexisted for 4 years at Oleander without intersecting, because Oleander did not attract many Japanese customers, and because on the rare occasions when a Japanese customer appeared, my manager Marcus had not known to direct them to my section. The Japanese and the waitressing were two separate rooms in my life, and I had not thought much about what would happen if the door between them opened. The door opened on a Tuesday evening in October at table 14. The dinner progressed. The tasting menu at Oleander was 9 courses, which was not the kind of meal that progressed quickly. It was the kind of meal that progressed with the deliberate pace of an institution that believes time is an ingredient. I served each course with the attention the room required. I monitored the table with the specific peripheral awareness of a practiced server, glasses that needed refilling, a course that needed pacing, the specific energy of a table that told you whether it wanted to be engaged or left to itself. The table wanted to be left to itself. Specifically, the 5 American men wanted to be left to their deal conversation, which was escalating through the courses with the specific energy of people whose wine consumption was increasing their willingness to make points loudly. The woman at the head of the table continued to not talk. She listened. She ate with the specific attention to food of someone who takes eating seriously, who considers what is on the plate and responds to it rather than consuming it while doing something else. When she ate the 3rd course, a delicate dashi preparation that our Japanese-trained chef had constructed with particular care, something happened in her expression. Something small and private, a momentary softening, the specific response of someone who has tasted something that is right in a way that recalls something. I noticed things. It is the skill of the work and also something I was before the work. At the 5th course, Gary said something that I want to tell you about because it is the thing that changed the direction of the night. He was explaining something about the terms of the deal. I was at an adjacent table, close enough to hear, not close enough to be obviously listening. He was explaining it to the other American men. He was not explaining it to her. He was explaining it in the way that people explain things when they do not expect the person they are in the room with to understand or engage, when the explanation is for the room rather than for the recipient. He said, and I am going to quote this as precisely as I can because precision matters here. Yuki's team will need to align on the restructuring terms, but honestly, given the language barrier, I think the technical details are better handled between our legal teams. She's here for the relationship piece. The language barrier. I looked at her. She had heard it. She was at the head of the table. He had not lowered his voice. She had been looking at him as he said it. Her expression did not change. Not a flicker. The composure was complete and impenetrable, and I understood, watching it, that this composure was not natural equanimity, but practiced endurance. The expression of someone who has been sitting in rooms where people say things like that for a long time and has developed the specific skill of absorbing it without showing the absorption. She reached for her water glass. I was beside her in 4 steps. I refilled her water. As I did, I looked at her, at the specific quality of her composure, at the small thing that was happening behind the composure that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror, and I made a decision. I set down the water pitcher. I leaned slightly, the professional lean of a server speaking to a guest, close enough to be private, positioned so that my words would not carry to the rest of the table. And in Japanese, not tentative Japanese, not the apologetic Japanese of someone uncertain of their ground, but the Tokyo accented, precise, grammatically exact Japanese of someone who has been speaking it for 21 years, I said. The dashi in the 3rd course was made with kombu from Hokkaido. The chef trained in Kyoto for 2 years. He wanted you to know if you'd like to speak with him after dinner. The water glass stopped moving. She turned and looked at me. Not the furniture assessment. An entirely different look. The specific, focused attention of someone who has just received information that has overturned an assumption and is recalibrating at speed. Her eyes were very dark and very direct and entirely awake. She responded in Japanese. In the specific register of Japanese that is used between people who are equals in a context, not formal, not casual, the middle register of someone who has decided on the spot what category to put you in. "You're Japanese," she said. "Where did you learn?" "My father," I said. "He did a fellowship at Tokyo University Medical Center. He taught me from childhood." She looked at me for a moment. Something was happening in her expression that was not readable to anyone who was not paying close attention, and I was paying very close attention. "The dashi," she said. "You noticed I responded to it." "Yes," I said. "My grandmother made dashi every morning," she said, "when I was growing up in Osaka." "The smell of it is," she paused, finding the word, and used the Japanese word natsukashii, which has no direct English translation but means something like the specific bittersweet ache of nostalgia for something precious and past. "Natsukashii," I said. "Yes," she said, very quietly. Gary, across the table, had noticed the exchange. He was looking at us with the specific expression of someone who does not understand what is happening and is not sure he likes it. "Is everything okay over here?" he said, in English, louder than necessary. I looked at him. I said in the professional tone that Oleander required, "I was just letting Ms. Tanaka know about the provenance of the dashi. She had a question about the preparation." I looked back at her. In Japanese, "I'll let you know when the chef is available." She looked at me with the expression I would come to know better over the following months, the specific expression of someone who has encountered something unexpected and is deciding what to do with it. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. "Thank you," she said, in Japanese. And then, after a pause, "What is your name?" "Danielle," I said. "Danielle," she said, in the specific way of someone committing a name to the kind of memory that does not let things go. "You are now at the halfway point of this story, and I need you to understand something. The moment that just happened at table 14 is not the twist. The moment at table 14 is the beginning. What comes next, what Tanaka Yuki does with the name Danielle, and what Danielle discovers about Tanaka Yuki, and what both of them learn about what the world assumes about who speaks which languages and who belongs in which rooms, that is where this story actually lives. Subscribe right now. Drop your name and your city. Share this, because we are just getting started." She came back the following Tuesday, not with the group, alone. A reservation for one under the name Tanaka, which Marcus brought to my attention with the specific tone of a manager who has noticed something and is not sure what to make of it. "Your table," he said. "Table 14. She requested you specifically." I set the table for one. I put the water on. She arrived at 7 precisely, not 7:02, not 6:58. 7. The precision of someone for whom time is a form of respect. She was dressed differently from the dinner with the American men. Still precise, she was always precise. I would learn, in the way of someone who has understood that presentation is a language and who speaks it fluently. But differently precise. Less the precision of someone in a business context and more the precision of someone who has chosen for themselves what tonight looks like. She sat down. I approached. She looked up at me and said in Japanese without preamble, "I thought about what you said, about the kombu." "Did you ask the chef?" I said. "I did not need to," she said. "I could taste it. I simply wanted someone to confirm that I was tasting what I thought I was tasting and that I had not invented it." A pause. "I have been in this country for 3 weeks. I have eaten at 14 restaurants. That was the first meal where someone knew why something tasted the way it tasted." "The chef cares," I said. "Yes," she said. "That is what is rare." We slipped into Japanese the way you slip into a language when it is the more comfortable container for what you are trying to say naturally without announcement. She ordered. We spoke about the menu. I told her about the preparations she would encounter, and she listened with the focused attention she brought to everything. At the end of the meal, over tea, she said, "How long have you been doing this work?" 4 years, I said. "And before?" "Howard University, East Asian Studies." She looked at me steadily. "You are not a waitress," she said. She said it not as an insult to waitressing, but as an observation about category, the specific observation of someone who has assessed a person and found that the category the world has put them in does not match the contents. "I'm figuring out what I am," I said. "That is honest," she said. She poured more tea with the specific, unhurried attention she brought to everything physical. "What do you do with the Japanese beyond this?" "Nothing yet," I said. "Translation occasionally. Freelance." "Not consistently." She was quiet for a moment. "I have been conducting business in this country for 3 weeks," she said. "I have 2 translators assigned to me by my company. They are competent. They are also not," she paused, finding the precise word, "present." They translate words. They do not translate the thing underneath the words, which is where the actual business happens. I looked at her. "The dinner last Tuesday," she said. "Gary said something about a language barrier." She said it without inflection. "My English is excellent. I have spoken English for 30 years. I chose not to speak it at that dinner because I was learning more by listening than I would have by speaking, and people speak more honestly when they believe they are not being understood." She set down her teacup. "He told the table, at the 7th course, things about the deal terms that he has not told my team officially, because he believed I could not understand him." I was quiet. "What he told the table changes my negotiating position significantly," she said, "because I now know the actual terms he is willing to accept, which are substantially different from the terms he presented formally." She looked at me with the direct, assessing gaze that I had become familiar with. "This is what happens when the world assumes you do not understand the language." "The assumption did the work for you," I said. "Yes," she said. "It often does." A pause. "But it is exhausting to be underestimated as a strategy. After a while, you would prefer to simply be accurately estimated." I understood this. I understood it in the specific way of someone who has had their own underestimation to navigate, a Black woman with a Japanese degree waiting tables, the gap between what people assumed when they looked at me and what was actually there, the years of inhabiting that gap. "I know that feeling," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, with the specific quality of someone who has just found a point of genuine contact and is deciding what to do with it. "I imagine you do," she said. She came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Each week, table 14, requesting Danielle, and each week the dinner extended because the conversation extended, moving between Japanese and English as the subject required, covering ground that I had not expected to cover with a customer at a restaurant where I was employed to bring food. She told me about Tanaka Global, about founding it at 29, with money she had saved and borrowed and persuaded people to give her at a time when Japanese business culture did not have a natural category for a 29-year-old woman who wanted to build a technology company. She told me about the specific resistance, not always explicit, more often structural, the resistance of systems that have not been built to accommodate you and do not adjust easily. She told me about the years of proving and reproving, of having to be correct not just once but consistently and in public, of the specific tax that is levied on people who do not fit the default assumption of what a CEO looks like. I told her about Baltimore, about my father's Japanese and what it had given me, not just a language, but a way of seeing, the specific gift of bilingualism, which is not just the ability to speak two languages, but the ability to hold two frameworks simultaneously, to understand that what seems obvious in one language is not inevitable, that the world is constructed differently depending on which language you are standing inside. I told her about Howard, about the degree that had not yet found its full use, about the specific restlessness of someone who knows they have something and has not yet found the place where the having of it matters. She listened. She listened the way she listened to everything, completely, with the focused reception of someone for whom other people's experiences are data of a specific kind that she takes seriously. In the 5th week, she said, "I want to offer you something. I need you to hear it completely before you respond." I waited. "I am here for 3 more months," she said. "The deal with the American firm, I have restructured it, using the information I gathered at the dinner when they thought I was not listening, and the restructuring is in my favor. But the implementation phase will require sustained presence and sustained negotiation, and the kind of translation I described, not words, but the thing underneath the words." She looked at me steadily. "I want you to work with me as a cultural and linguistic consultant for the duration of my time here." I looked at her. "I know what you make at this restaurant," she said. It was not said unkindly. It was said the way someone states a relevant fact when they are building a proposal. "I am offering 5 times that for 3 months, with the possibility of a permanent position if the work is what I believe it will be." I was quiet for a long moment. "You are offering this to a waitress," I said. "I am offering this to a woman who speaks Japanese at native fluency, who holds a degree in East Asian studies, who has demonstrated in 5 weeks of conversation a quality of cultural understanding that my 2 assigned translators have not demonstrated in 3 years of employment." She set down her teacup. "The fact that you are currently a waitress is information about your circumstances, not your capabilities. I am in the business of capabilities." I looked at the table. I thought about the 4 years at Oleander, about the East Asian Studies degree and the Japanese and the freelance translation work that had not consistently materialized, and the specific restlessness that had been building, not dissatisfaction exactly, more the feeling of someone standing at a door they have not yet opened. "What would it involve?" I said. "Everything," she said, not as an exaggeration, as a precise description. "Being present in the negotiations. Translating not just the words but the register, the subtext, the specific communication that happens in Japanese between people who are paying attention and that the American side is not equipped to read. Being present in the social contexts, the dinners, the receptions, and providing the cultural navigation that 2 frameworks simultaneously makes possible." She paused. "And being honest with me about what you observe, about what is happening in the room. I do not want a translator. I have translators. I want someone who thinks." I looked at her. I thought about what she had said, not words but the thing underneath. I thought about my father at the kitchen table, teaching me hiragana, the specific love with which he had given me this thing that I had been carrying for 21 years without knowing what it was for. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. "Yes," I said. "I'll do it." What followed was the strangest and most clarifying 3 months of my life. I want to tell you the truth of it because the version that is easy to tell, the version where the opportunity arrives and the competent person executes it perfectly and everything resolves into a clear success story, is not the honest version. The honest version is more complicated and more real. The honest version is, I was terrified. Not of the Japanese. The Japanese was the one thing I was not terrified of, the one room in the whole enterprise where I was entirely at home, where 21 years of accumulated fluency produced a specific confidence that did not require maintenance. I was terrified of the rest of it. Of the boardrooms and the negotiating tables and the receptions where the people on the other side of the deal were the specific kind of American business power that looked at me with the same furniture assessment that Gary at table 14 had delivered to Tanaka Yuki, and recalibrated when I opened my mouth and produced something they were not expecting. I was terrified of the gap between what I was in those rooms, a 26-year-old black woman who had been a waitress 4 weeks ago, and what the rooms expected, and whether the Japanese would be enough to bridge that gap or whether the gap was something that the Japanese could not address. Tanaka Yuki saw this. She saw it with the same precision she brought to everything, and she addressed it with the same directness. You are managing how you appear, she said to me 3 days in the back of the car between meetings. I'm adjusting to the context, I said. You are shrinking, she said, not unkindly, precisely. I have watched you shrink for 3 days, and I am telling you to stop because you are less useful to me when you are managing your presence than when you are simply being present. I looked at her. I have spent 15 years being told, in various ways and by various people, that I should be smaller in rooms than I actually am, she said. I spent the first 5 years adjusting. The next 5 years I spent being angry about it. The last 5 years I have spent ignoring the instruction entirely. It is the most productive 5 years of my professional life. She looked at me with the direct gaze. You are 26 years old, and you have something that took me 15 years to develop. Do not waste time shrinking. I held that. It was not comfortable, the specific discomfort of receiving truth that requires something of you. But it was honest, and it was given without performance, and I took it in, and I made myself bigger in the next meeting. The twist arrived in the 7th week. It arrived in the form of a dinner, a formal dinner hosted by the American firm, ostensibly celebratory, the deal having moved to a stage that warranted a celebration dinner. Oleander. Table 14, which the Americans had requested because they had eaten there before, which I found so specific and so right that I had to control my expression when Marcus told me. I was there as a consultant, not as a server. I sat at the table, not beside it, in a dress my mother had helped me choose, with my hair down because Tanaka Yuki had said, the day before, without preamble, "Wear your hair down tomorrow. It is yours. Do not put it away." Gary arrived. He saw me at the table. His expression went through a visible sequence, recognition, confusion, recalibration, in approximately 2 seconds. "Danielle," he said, uncertain. "Gary," I said, "thank you for choosing Oleander. I have a particular attachment to it." Tanaka Yuki sat at the head of the table. She was in a suit that had been made for her, not bought, made, the specific difference visible to anyone who was looking. She looked at Gary with the composed expression that I now understood was not neutral, but was very specifically the expression of someone who has the complete information and is waiting for the other person to reveal how much they have. Gary sat down. He looked between Tanaka, Yuki, and me with the expression of someone whose map of the situation has just turned out to be wrong and is trying to orient from a new position. Danielle is working with my team as a cultural and linguistic consultant, Tanaka Yuki said, in English, perfectly, with the specific precision of someone who has been speaking English for 30 years and has chosen, until this moment, not to demonstrate it in this context. Gary's expression was its own complete story. "Your English," he started, "is excellent," she said. "Thank you for noticing." The composure was complete, not unkind, precise. I find that people are more forthcoming when they believe they are not being understood. It is a useful information gathering tool. She paused. The restructured terms I proposed last month, the ones that significantly changed the equity split in Tanaka Global's favor, were informed by a conversation that happened at this table, at a dinner approximately 7 weeks ago, which you conducted in the belief that the language barrier you mentioned to your colleagues made the technical details inaccessible to me. The table was very quiet. "There is no language barrier," she said. "There has never been a language barrier. The assumption of the language barrier is, however, a tool that I have found remarkably useful in certain negotiations." Gary looked at her, then at me, then back at her. "The equity split," he said. "The restructuring you proposed stands," she said. "It is in the signed documents. Your legal team approved it." A pause. "I recommend, going forward, conducting your private strategy conversations in a genuinely private context, or at minimum, verifying the language capabilities of all parties at the table before you speak." I watched Gary process this. I watched the specific recalibration of a man who has just understood that the furniture at the head of the table was not furniture, and was never furniture, and had been listening to every word with full comprehension while he operated from an assumption that was costing him more than he knew. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about this because triumph would suggest I was invested in his exposure. And I was not. What I felt was more complicated and more real than triumph. I felt the specific satisfaction of watching an assumption meet its disproof. The satisfaction of watching the world's certainty about who is in which room and why collide with the actual contents of the room. I thought about my father at the kitchen table with the hiragana. I thought about 21 years of a language that I had carried through every room that had looked at me and seen something other than what I was. I thought about Tanaka Yuki in this room and every room before it, composed, enduring, collecting information from the assumptions of the people around her. I thought about the thing she had said to me in the car. The people who tell you to be smaller are not telling you about your size. They are telling you about their capacity. 3 months became 6 months. 6 months became a year. I did not go back to Oleander as a waitress. Marcus sent me a bottle of wine when I left, good wine, chosen with attention, which was the kind of gesture that told me what I had meant to the place even when the place had not known what I meant to it. The permanent position Tanaka Yuki had mentioned became real and became specific. Cultural and Strategic Communications Director for Tanaka Global's North American operations. A title that was a precise description of the work, not words but the thing underneath words, the cultural translation that happened in the space between what was said in one language and what was understood in another. I moved to a new apartment. I called my father on the first night in the new apartment, and I told him what had happened, the full arc of it, from the water pitcher at table 14 to the dinner, where the assumption met its disproof to the offer, and what the offer had produced. I told him in Japanese, which felt right, which felt like using the right container for the specific thing being described. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, in Japanese, the specific sentence that a parent says when they have watched something they gave their child come back to them transformed by the child's own use of it. I taught you the words. You found what the words were for. I held the phone and looked at my new apartment, the boxes, the window with the city beyond it, the specific beginning of a new life that had been made possible by two women, one of whom was my father's gift to me carried in a language, and one of whom had looked at me across a restaurant table and seen the thing underneath the category. Tanaka Yuki called me the following morning. She called at 7 precisely. "How is the apartment?" she said. "It's good," I said. "It's mine." "Yes," she said. Things that are yours feel different from things that are borrowed. A pause. "I need you in Tokyo in 3 weeks. There is a negotiation I want you present for. The Japanese side has certain assumptions about the American consultants they will be meeting." "Assumptions that might be useful," I said. "Assumptions that might be corrected at the right moment," she said, "with the right language." I thought about the water pitcher. About the dashi in the third course and the specific way she had responded to it without performing the response. About Natsukashii and what it meant to find the right word for the thing you were feeling and have someone else know it. "I'll be there," I said. "I want to tell you what I know now, standing in a new life that was made possible by a Tuesday evening and a water pitcher, and 21 years of a language carried in love from a father to a daughter. The assumptions that the world makes about who speaks which languages and who belongs in which rooms are not neutral. They are doing specific work, the work of maintaining a particular version of who has access to what, of keeping the rooms organized around the expectations of the people who built them. When those assumptions meet reality, when the world's certainty about what a Japanese billionaire CEO understands and what a black waitress carries collides with what is actually there, that collision is not just satisfying. It is instructive. It tells you something about the nature of assumptions and the nature of the people who make them. Tanaka Yuki taught me something that I think about every day. She taught it not through a lesson, but through demonstration, through the way she moved through rooms that had not been built for her and used the specific disadvantage of being underestimated as a tool. She did not pretend the underestimation was not happening. She did not perform outrage at it. She took the assumption that the room had made and she used it to see the room more clearly than the room could see itself. My father taught me Japanese. Tanaka Yuki taught me what to do with it. And what I carry now, in the work I do across languages and cultures, and the specific space between what is said and what is understood, is both of those teachings simultaneously. I am Danielle Ockhafer. I am 28 years old. I speak Japanese at native fluency with a Tokyo accent that people find surprising, which is fine. Surprise is just an assumption meeting its disproof, and I have learned to find that specific collision clarifying rather than exhausting. I no longer wait tables. I still go to Oleander. I sit at table 14 when it is available. I order the tasting menu, and I notice the dashi, and I think about the specific evening when a water pitcher and a word that has no English translation opened a door that has not closed since. My father calls every Sunday. We speak Japanese for the first 20 minutes and English for the rest, which is the rhythm we have always had. He asks about the work. I tell him. He is proud in the specific way of a parent who gave their child something they loved and watched the child make it their own. Auntie Patricia, my mother's sister, the one who always said East Asian studies would not produce a salary, called me last month. I told her what the salary is. There was a pause of a specific quality. Well, she said. Well, I said. Your father always did talk too much Japanese at the dinner table, she said. He did, I said. It turns out that was the point. That is Danielle's story, and Tanaka Yuki's story. And in a way, the story of every person who has walked into a room carrying something the room could not see and waited for the moment when the assumption met the reality. Subscribe to this channel right now. We release a new emotional story every single week, and every story is for the person who needs it most. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. We want to know who is in this room tonight. People are watching this from Baltimore and Tokyo and Lagos and London, and everywhere in between, and every single name in those comments is a person who showed up, and that matters. Share this video with one person, the person who has been carrying something in a room that cannot see it yet. Tell them the room will see it. Tell them to keep carrying. And next week, we are bringing you the story of a woman who was passed over for a promotion 11 times in 15 years at the same company. On the day she finally quit, she walked out of the building and into the lobby of the company that had been trying to hire her for 6 years. The CEO of that company was waiting in the lobby. He had been waiting for 3 hours. We are calling it. She quit after being passed over 11 times. The CEO was already waiting in the lobby. Set your notification. You need to be here for this one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the very end. And to every person who has ever been assessed as furniture in a room they belong in, you are not furniture. You never were. Someone is going to notice the way you respond to the dashi. They are already watching.